Maurice Ngwakum, an exemplary leader and change maker whose journey embodies academic excellence, professional prowess, and unwavering commitment to community development. With honors from the John Molson School of Business, Maurice excelled in economics while pursuing minors in computer science and business. At Deloitte Consulting, he spearheaded transformative projects in digital strategy and project management, leaving a lasting impact on large-scale government initiatives and banking sector transformations. Beyond his corporate endeavors, Maurice co-founded the Project Umoja Podcast and serves as a global shaper at the World Economic Forum, advocating for social cohesion and addressing global challenges. Committed to community empowerment, he has pioneered initiatives like the Black Student Career Development Initiative, fostering wealth creation and professional growth for Black youth. Hey Maurice, how are you? Welcome to Talking with Sprout.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. And I'm first of all, I wanted to just thank you for having me on. We haven't spoken in years. I don't know how much we're going to get into the details of our own relationship, Shaquille, and us having done primary school and middle school together,
Yeah,
in Mozambique, like over a decade ago. But like it was such a pleasure hearing from you. I was telling you earlier off camera that like I had a chance over this past year to just almost randomly meet a bunch of friends and classmates of ours from Mozambique, just in different locations and places. And having you reach out is definitely a huge pleasure. And I'm really happy to be able to speak with you today. So
yeah,
yeah, let's get
likewise,
into it.
Maurice. Likewise, I'm happy to that you accepted our invitation.
Mhm.
Sprout is a special project, so and I see you're very aligned to a lot of the values that Sprout has. So I'm
Mhm.
glad that we can have this conversation.
Mhm.
I want to get right into it. So I wanted to know a little bit more about your background,
Sure.
given the introduction that was done. But if you could speak more on, your personal journey and what led you to follow, your career in digital transformation or any entrepreneurial venture that you had throughout your career.
For sure. All right, so I'll go ahead and get started and share a little bit on my background. And feel free to jump in at any point in time if anything stands out or to cut me off if I'm going too long. But maybe I'll start with so my name is Maurice Ngwakum-Akisa. And so I'm Cameroonian, born in Yaoundé, Cameroon. Let me share some interesting facts about Cameroon. So Cameroon is the only African country that has significant historical English and French speaking populations. Interestingly enough, I currently live in Canada, and Canada and Cameroon are the only two countries in the world that have this dichotomy where you have a large English and French speaking population. The only difference is that the minority groups are inversed, right? So in the Cameroonian context, I'm an Anglophone. All right. So the majority of Cameroonians are francophones, but about 20, a little bit over 20% of the population is English speaking. And so I'm from that side of Cameroon, but I grew up in the French speaking side of Cameroon. And then in the Canadian context, I've been living in Canada for about 8 years now. And in the Canadian context, I live in the French speaking side of Canada, with the majority of Canada being Anglophone. So a lot of my experiences has been in kind of like these even within the Cameroonian sense, it's always been this kind of like dynamic in terms of engaging with different cultures. Like growing up in French speaking Cameroon, like with my family, everyone speaks English. Right. So at home I'm speaking English, but outside of the house it's French, and then here in Quebec and Canada, it's very interesting because here this is French Canada, people speak French, but when I go and work so I'm based in Montreal. When I go and work in Toronto, you're with all these English speaking Canadians that have no visibility, no understanding, or limited understanding, shall I say, of the French culture in Canada. And to go beyond that, so in terms of us, we met in Mozambique, like I said, all right? So not only within the Cameroonian context, but even growing up, having lived in Mozambique and other African countries, a lot of my experiences growing up was kind of engaging in these cross-cultural spaces, and being deeply embedded in it, and having these spaces shape a lot of my identity, right? So I was born in Cameroon, for the audience to know. At the time, my mother is a teacher. My mother actually taught us at a certain point, at certain stints in Mozambique. And my father is a doctor and has been working in public health for the past 20 odd years. So growing up, because of my father's role, born in Cameroon, lived in Chad. From Chad, we moved as a family to Haiti. From Haiti back to Cameroon for some time. I started going to school in Cameroon. From Cameroon to Mali, Mali to Angola, Angola to Mozambique, Mozambique to Madagascar. So before moving to Mozambique, I was in Angola, and then after Mozambique, I moved to Madagascar for about 4 years. And then I did my last year of high school in Zambia before moving to Montreal to start my degree. And so when I moved to Montreal, one of the big things that really were front of mind when moving to the Western world. It was my first time really living in the West and in the developed world. I'd seen a lot of the developing world. I'd seen a lot of Africa. I'd lived in Francophone, Anglophone, and Lusophone Africa at the time. So even though I was 17 when I moved, I felt like traveling matures you very, very quickly. You know what I mean? And especially when you're in cross-cultural spaces. So I felt very mature at the time. I had a very deep understanding, or at least at the time, I thought a very deep understanding of the challenges that different African countries faced. And I knew brain drain was a big challenge that we faced. So leaving was a frustration in knowing that I could contribute back to the continent and wanting to do so, but also I understood that it would be even a new opportunity for me to continue to grow, to learn more about why Africans were poor despite being so rich in so many ways, our youth, our resources, our culture, but materially poor. And so when I went to university, I chose to study economics to understand the poverty, the questions around resource allocation globally and why things were the way that they were. And then I also minored in computer science and business studies, right? A minor that, because of our school of engineering in my university, I would even argue that minor from a credit perspective was very similar to a major. I spent half of my time or a third of my time with engineers, a third of my time with economists, and a third of my time with business students. And I think that diversity of an academic experience also shaped a lot of the way I see the world today, a lot of my experiences, a lot of the ways in which I think about problem solving as well. And it also fed my curiosity a lot more. Computer science was really focused on understanding where the world was going, understanding how we could leverage technology to leapfrog. And at the time, when I first got to university, a big reason why I chose computer science was because I was working on a startup in Zambia focused on education technology and facilitating the transition from secondary to tertiary education by providing Zambian high school students with information around universities, scholarships, things of that nature. Right. So that was a big part of my early experience. Since then, and we can get more into these details, but during my time at Concordia University in Montreal, I took on a range of leadership roles. I led, as president of our African Student Association. I led our business school student unions board of directors. I sat on the board. I sat on faculty council. And a lot of those experiences then pushed me towards consulting because, if you're highly driven, highly motivated, really curious about the world and not exactly sure where to find yourself, consulting is very appealing because the whole pitch of consulting is that, okay, you're working with the most intelligent people in the world and you're working to solve some of the world's biggest challenges, right? And so after having graduated, I started working at Deloitte in consulting in our systems and cloud engineering practice. And over the past few years, I've been working with Canadian institutions to advance their digitization, to implement digital systems, and to think about how to evolve these institutions for the future. All right. So there's a little bit synopsis on who I am, but looking forward to getting into all the details.
Yeah, so you mentioned Deloitte, and even though Deloitte wasn't brought up in your introduction, I did want to touch on it first because it is something that you're currently working in right now.
Yep.
And I wanted you to kind of give us a quick summary on or paint the picture of what it's like, as a
Sure.
young leader and someone that has ambition to be working for such a big company such as Deloitte. And maybe you
Yeah,
could give us some examples, that we could then understand what type of projects you guys have and
for sure.
and how you guys take front on the goals and mission that you guys are on.
For sure. So I'll speak to Deloitte, but you also made an interesting comment about being a young leader, and I'm hoping that we'll get into questions around what leadership is and what it means to be, and I
Yeah.
think there's a lot to even being identified as a young leader. Although I do identify as that in many ways. It is something that I constantly question as well.
Hmm.
And so like we'll get a chance to get into that. But as far as Deloitte is concerned, for those that are not familiar, Deloitte is one of the oldest and certainly one of the largest global consulting firms and think tanks, historically known for accounting and the work that we do in compliance and risk management, things of that nature. It is one of the very few companies in the world that is present in virtually every country, present in virtually every industry. There's very few things that we don't do. And so I would say one thing that's very unique about the experience at Deloitte is that, you're working with experts in virtually every industry. You go into the office and you sit so we have open offices, right? So you can book a room and like be in sit in office, or it's kind of like a super library is what I would say, in terms of when the vibe when you come into the office, you sit down, there's workspaces, there's a cafeteria, there's little offices, you can book rooms for team meetings, things of that nature, virtual calls. And when you go and sit down into the open space, at any given point in time, the person sitting next to you is doing something that you have absolutely no visibility on. So I work in systems and cloud engineering. I could be sitting down next to someone that's doing financial modeling. I could be sitting down next to someone that's doing mining work, a specialist in the mining industry. I could be sitting down next to someone that's a specialist in marketing for fast fashion brands and companies. We do a lot of consulting for Fortune 500 companies and many more. And it's very young. A lot of the consultants, people in consulting especially, but also accounting, a lot of the consultants are very young, between 20 and 30 years old. Now, when you get to the more senior manager, partner level, it definitely gets older, but a lot of the bulk of the workforce is very young people. So it's very dynamic. It's people that came out of universities, people that are super motivated, super driven. It's almost like a separate university, I would say. And I think that's a mindset that a lot of people have, that obviously it's a job. You're an employee, you're working full time, but you're constantly being put on projects that are very interesting, that you have to be an expert in. So you have to learn. The learning curve is really, really quick, but there's this privilege of being perceived as a problem solver, as someone that's intelligent enough to find solutions to any problem provided to them. And so you're definitely pushed to learn at a rapid rate, and it definitely opens doors to a range of other industries and gives people the opportunity to specialize in different spaces. So I'd say that's kind of like the Deloitte experience in a nutshell. And I would say even historically, we've been known as a accounting firm. And I'd say maybe in the past 15, 20 years, I might be getting my dates wrong, but it's been slowly transitioning and positioning itself as a consulting firm. And we do a lot of work in tech consulting, kind of like what I'm doing. It's increasingly becoming a very big part of our business. And you'll see this with EY, for example, with KPMG, even with the McKinseys, the BCGs. They're very focused on technology strategy, technology consulting, because there's this huge digital wave that's capturing institutions globally. And even EY in the past 12 or 24 months had this whole question around whether or not to split their brand into just the accounting business and have that be a completely separate business and selling that off, and then having the consulting being a completely separate business, right? So that just to speak to the transition that's happening in the industry and the role that we play as a technology firm in terms of ushering in this new digital age and allowing the institutions to digitize, right? Unlike what we see in many African countries, you can go to a government office in Cameroon, in Mozambique, and you'll see there's papers everywhere. If you ask for a file, someone will go in the back, and that's kind of the old world. And in order to accelerate, to automate institutional processes and to make them a lot more efficient, we're playing a role in this sort of transformation, or digital transformation, as you introduced me as, that's occurring in global institutions.
That's
Yeah.
really interesting because Sprout is trying to fit within the, this new wave, or it's not new anymore, but, with AI and everything, there's always something that comes up, and that then the whole digital transformation or tech talk is new.
Yeah.
It's something new. So, Sprout as a nonprofit and as an organization that's, in Africa, but that wants to be a leading organization or exemplary organization in Africa, needs to have these qualities. And so since we're having a conversation,
For sure.
could go a little bit off topic right now, and I think it would be interesting for the audience. What could be some ideas that you could, some concepts that you could say that maybe people could then brainstorm, if someone that has an organization, how could they, with being a nonprofit, for example, or not having enough resources or in a big enough team, how could they start to look at technology or the industry, and try to bring that into their own workflow, so that they can also make digital transformation happen.
No, that's really interesting. So I would say so I've been working in the space for the past 4 years now, just about the past 4 years. And what I would say is, the three core pillars of digital transformation are people, process, technology, in that order. And when you find yourself in these large scale transformation programs, and just for people to get an idea of the scale of what it is that we're doing, right? Like we're building infrastructure. You know what I mean? Like building a digital system for an institution is like building a bridge, right? You will have solution architects, right? You will have solution engineers. You will have project managers. You'll have a finance team. You'll have an HR team. All meant to deliver this institutional digital infrastructure. You'll have projects that are multi-million-dollar digital transformation projects, right? You'll have projects that have over 100 people working on a piece of software. You'll have projects that last up to 7 years. You know what I mean? And the plan is for you to build out the system over a 7-year window, right? So people need to see this as infrastructure. It's incredibly challenging to put these things in place. One of the biggest challenges with dealing with institutions, with large scale institutions, and this is with any infrastructure, right? Whether you're building a bridge, whether you're building an intercontinental highway, whatever it might be, is oftentimes these especially the public goods, like a bridge is a public good, right? So it's hard for a private entity to finance something of that scale and to recoup on their investment in a timeline that makes sense and in a way that serves the public appropriately, right? So like if you were to have a private institution own the roads, for example, and not have it be a government or a more large scale public institution, what would end up happening is that you'd have toll gates be these exorbitantly expensive prices where most of the public won't be able to access them because a private entity is a profit maximizer, right? Versus the government is supposed to be a value maximizer for the community and whatnot, right? So a lot of these large scale infrastructure, digital infrastructure projects are oftentimes financed by governments most of the time, especially the largest ones, especially because they're the only ones that can sustain this over a period of time. And the largest challenge there with working with government on these issues is that you need to keep, irregardless of the political power that is in office or in leadership, you have to keep them engaged, right? So if you're building a project over 10 years, you have one party that starts the project and they're like, yo, this is great. And then 5 years in, the political climate changes. And then, you've put millions of dollars on the ground. You have thousands or hundreds of staff working on this thing. And then a new party comes in and is like, hey, listen, we're not going to finance that anymore. This doesn't make sense. Shovels down, So that's why when we talk about people, process, technology, oftentimes the technology is the easy part. You know what I mean? It's always the easiest part. And I think the most interesting thing about digital transformation is the transformation. It's not about the digital. A technology is a technology. A tool is a tool. People invent these things every single day. Some never get used. Others are used. It's not about the tool itself, right? It's more so about how do you implement it at a massive scale. And one example I'll give and something I'll share with the audience is that I shared this with you earlier on, Shaquille, that in this fall, I'm going to be moving to China to do my master's at Tsinghua University, which is a leading global university in AI and technology, a range of other things. alma mater of Xi Jinping, and I'm going to be studying global affairs with a focus on China's digitization strategy, right? And I was having this conversation with some global shapers at the World Economic Forum even recently, just 2 weekends ago when we had a retreat. And we're talking about kind of like China's emergence over the past 50 years, you know what I mean? From being an agricultural based society to having cities, multiple cities that rival New York and London and so on and so forth. You cannot, if you think of China being like Maputo 50 years ago and where they are now, you'd not even like it makes no sense. And that's a big part of my intrigue in terms of trying to understand their development process and finding ways to apply that to Africa's development. But to my original point about innovation and the people part. So the conversation I was having with the global shapers was focused on, innovation. And if you were to compare innovation in China versus in the United States, right? And the argument that we were making was that when it comes to innovation, China, don't get me wrong, is brilliant and is leading in a range of different spaces. But over the past 100 years, even till today, like even recently, if we see like ChatGPT with OpenAI, a lot of global, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But just to get back into things, a lot of global innovation is led by the United States. Till today, right? Like leaps in AI, leaps in blockchain and cybersecurity. China is playing a big role still, but the US, I would still say till today, in terms of patents, in terms of innovation, is a leader because they're able to pull the best. They have this huge immigration history and they're able to pull the best talent globally, right? From global spaces. So the point I was trying to make is that one of the biggest differences between China and the United States, that although the United States leads in innovation, one of the reasons why China has been able to grow so rapidly is because of the way their political institutions are designed, right? And I will say this to the audience, take this with a grain of salt, right? I am still very much learning about these things as well. These are my these are my perceptions of things and my understanding of things at this stage. And if we talk in a year's time or in 24 months' time after I've lived in China, I'll be able to give you even more profound insights. But one of the big reasons why China has been able to rise and, evolve so rapidly is because they have this advantage of central planning. There's one party, we make a decision, and that's the end of the story, right? So we might not be the ones developing the technology, but once the technology is developed, it's open for everyone to use, right? So if you think about like the high-speed railways that go across China, if you compare that infrastructure to many other developed countries, you know what I mean? They're very advanced. But why is China able to just say, hey, we're building this and this is happening? End of story. It's because they don't have that same amount of political diversity. And when you look at like something like COVID, for example, one of the biggest challenges in a lot of Western countries was that there's this whole anti-vax movement, right? And now at this stage, in terms of where we are, knowing what COVID was and understanding, there's a lot of questions around the vaccines and around how they came to be and all of that. However, at the time when we were in the midst of COVID, everything was in lockdown, people thousands of people were dying. We didn't know what was happening. Objectively, the vaccine was the only solution that we had, right? So objectively, with the information that was provided to us at the time, it did not make, it's very challenging to accept that people were like, hey, we're not taking vaccines. Obviously, the historical context is important. I think if we're going to talk about Black communities, African communities, it's important to understand that within African communities, there's nuances there in terms of that uncertainty. But at the global scale, beyond just African and Black communities, there's this huge pushback against vaccines that happen in Western countries in North America. But if you look at China, once again, you have the technology, right? The transformation is people take the vaccines and everyone's healthier, right? But the people side, in terms of the people management of implementing that new technology with the vaccine, is very different because of the cultural and political context in North America versus in China. They have 1.4 billion people. We have a vaccine. This is what it is. Like, end of story. There is no protests about we're not taking the vaccine. We have a problem to solve, and this is the only way, So that's part of the people piece. But to your question about like organizations and how do they think about it, more often than not, the transformation that you're seeking has nothing to do with the technology. You know what I mean? It starts with the people, right? Because you can have the technology. If you come in with the best AI solution and you're working with, many Africans that don't have digital literacy skills, you know what I mean? Like, who cares about AI? Like, people can't send emails, people can't type. You know what I mean? Like, what are we talking about here? Right. So there's a huge part of like digital literacy that has to be addressed. Now, once you deal with the people, then there's also processes, right? So people, process, technology. If you have a process that's horrible and highly inefficient, even if you build the technology around it, like it won't go very far, right? So you want to ensure that your processes, and when we go through digital transformation programs, there's a whole process engineering aspect and strategy that comes with that, right? There's a unique window there when we're building a new digital system for an institution, for an organization or a company. There's a great window there for us to do a mapping of all organizational processes, things that most small organizations don't even think about. Like, there's processes that you have, like the president will make a decision and you guys just do it, or you know what I mean? But it's not a clearly mapped out process, right? And this happens with small companies and with large institutions. Large institutions, you might think they're formalized and everything looks great, but there's a lot of processes that are not formally documented, right? So when we're going to build a new entity for this institution, it gives us a very unique opportunity to map out these processes, which we have to do in order to build the technology around it. And in mapping out those processes, we have a unique opportunity to re-engineer those processes and then build the solutions around it, right? So I would say for small organizations, you can do a lot of work just focusing on the people and the process. And the technology, you'll find an engineer, you'll pay them a fee, you know what I mean? You'll do a contract, they'll build a system for you, they'll train you on it, and they'll move on. But if you don't have an approach, if that engineer is just there to build you something and you haven't thought about your processes, you haven't thought about your people, you can have someone come and build you something and you will spend a couple $1,000s on it as a small organization, and you'll never use the system, and that's very common with a lot of even large institutions, right? So that's the advice I'd give to small organizations thinking about how to integrate technologies into their businesses and processes.
Well, that was a good way to sum up just generally how companies and organizations operate, and also you brought into this more geopolitical conversation, which is very interesting, but it's not something that I'm going to bring on now.
Right.
I do want to mention, though, a World Economic Forum, because I do think that it's very interesting that you are a global shaper, and I would like you to explain a little bit about what you do at World Economic Forum. What does a global shaper mean, and how did that come about?
Yeah, so maybe we can start with my perception, or let me try and introduce the World Economic Forum as best as I can, right? So the World Economic Forum is a global institution that seeks to bring together globally leading institutions, companies, global leaders, presidents, CEOs, to come together and discuss and address a range of global issues that affect us all. So I believe the World Economic Forum was founded just about 20 years ago. And as a offshoot of the World Economic Forum, beyond just working with global leaders, every single year they have their Davos conference where they bring together heads of states, CEOs, executives. But beyond the whole, adult big world, where they bring together actual leaders of militaries and multi-billion dollar companies, they have this other program called the Global Shapers Program, right? And so this is open to people between the ages of 18 and 30. I believe, right? And the Global Shaper community is a community of young leaders globally that are looking for ways to address, that are impacted by local issues in their local communities, but realize that these local issues don't only impact their communities, but also have a global aspect to it. So when we talk about climate change, this is something that affects us all. You'll have, maybe in some areas you'll have floods, you know what I mean? In other areas you'll have fires, you know what I mean? And in your local community, it manifests itself differently, but at the global scale, it's the same phenomenon, right? So climate change is one example. We can talk about governance as another example. We can talk about democracy. We can talk about, in my case, technology, right? And so my focus within the Global Shapers community over the past years has been cybersecurity, right? So I'm part of the Inclusive Cyber Project that was founded by this brilliant lady called Kathy Liu in Montreal, that's focused on addressing the gap between the labor gap within the cybersecurity space, right? So within cybersecurity today, as we've just discussed, there's been an acceleration to digitization in institutions globally that was enhanced by COVID. Right. But this acceleration has created even more cybersecurity risks globally and created an increase in demand for cybersecurity talent. However, the challenge is that there is a huge labor shortage in terms of the cybersecurity talent that's out there for a range of reasons that we're trying to address. First and foremost, most cybersecurity talent is recruited from traditional engineering, computer science backgrounds. But within the cybersecurity space, there's a range of different roles that don't necessarily require people to come from computer science or engineering backgrounds. You can have a background in literature, in marketing, in accounting, in political science, in economics, you know what I mean, and still work in cybersecurity. All right. So what we've done is we've taken a framework from an American institution of technology that outlines all of the core skill sets in cybersecurity. And what we've done is that we've taken those skill sets or the skill set framework, and we've mapped it to self-reported skill sets of people in different industries, right? So skill sets such as in political science, critical thinking, in marketing, perhaps research, things like that. And we've taken those skill sets from people from atypical backgrounds, and we've mapped that onto the sought after skill sets in cybersecurity. And we've done this whole sensitization campaign to let people from atypical backgrounds know that, hey, you actually have the skills to thrive in cybersecurity. And for firms in the private sector to be like, hey, you don't actually have to only look at people from computer science or engineering backgrounds. You can actually recruit from a range of other roles, right? So we've spoken at conferences, we've done workshops at universities. We've since expanded the project from Montreal to Rwanda. So I worked closely with because we have hubs in major cities across the world, right? So now this is a global project. So we've been working with the team in Kigali in Rwanda to build out the inclusive cyber project in Rwanda, but with a local twist, because the challenges are different. You're dealing with youth unemployment in certain African countries that are north of 50%, particularly during COVID. So in Rwanda and Kigali, we're mainly focused on partnering with the ABSA group, the South African bank, and working on developing a crash course that would train young Rwandans in cybersecurity in a short given period of time, and then help get them roles specifically in the Rwandan private sector. And then we've also expanded to the hub in London as well and helped them build out the project there. So that's been my experience in Global Shapers. But like I said, there's a range of other projects that other people work on, and there's a range of conferences that shapers are able to attend regionally and globally to engage with one another, kind of like GISS that we did in high school. So GISS is Global Issue Service Summit. That was like a kind of a conference that different international schools across the African continent would send students to go to talk about issues that they experience in their local communities and projects that they're doing to address those. So I would say it's exactly like GISS, but at a global scale and with a more diverse group of people, because once again, on the African continent, it's mainly international schools. So that's what I would say about the Global Shapers.
And just before we move on, so Global Shapers and World Economic Forum are not connected in any way?
They are affiliated. They are connected. Like the Global Shapers is a World Economic Forum project, but the World Economic Forum is a separate entity, I would say.
Yes. Yeah. Which actually SPROWT is been following, and on our newsletters we do reference a lot of the what is shared on the World Economic Forum platform. So yeah, it's quite interesting. So you did mention earlier about questioning leadership and being a young leader. I do want you to speak a little bit on the program you co-founded for Black Youth Empowerment. I would like you to also speak a little bit about the Black Youth Career Development Initiative, so that we can maybe have a little bit of a conversation around leadership and based on the initiatives and the program that you co-founded.
For sure. So at Concordia University in Montreal, around the time when I graduated, one of the things that I realized was that so by the time I graduated, I got an offer to start work towards the end of my third year in university. I did a 4-year program. So by the time I started my last semester, like I already knew that I'd be working in a year's time at Deloitte, right? So as we're approaching my last semester, and I worked very, very hard. I remember my first year, I was going to networking events, recruitment events, hackathons, all kinds of things. And I did that throughout my degree. I'd reach out to professionals on LinkedIn. I'd get coffee chats. That was a huge part of my experience. And I was very privileged because in my first week in Canada, I met my career advisor, who is a superstar. I think she's incredible. I only have positive things to say about her. And she really played a key role in pushing me towards thinking about career development, towards thinking about recruiting. And I have an atypical profile. You know what I mean? I'm an international student. So I'm not Canadian. I've lived in all of these countries. I'm doing economics, comp sci business. That isn't like, it's an interesting profile, but employers are looking for specific skill sets to do specific roles, especially at the entry level. So I had a very unique approach to crafting my own professional profile. So by the time I was graduating, I realized that a lot of the students around me hadn't had that support. Right. A lot of the African students, the Black students, the Caribbean students, especially that community, although there were resources on campus, these students were not given the spaces to, didn't have a unique space, unfortunately, to have access to these resources or have a tailored program to support them in terms of their specific experiences. Because the reality is that, looking for a job, if I was born and raised in Montreal as a white man, to put things bluntly, my experience would inherently be different from someone that, even if you're born and raised and you're of a minority group, or if you're not born in Canada, which is the case for many people, your experiences are very different and you do need tailored support, I would say. So in recognizing this problem, that's how the Black Student Career Development Initiative was born, right? So at the time, in my second year of university, I was president of our African Student Association, and I'd worked with a lot of the different Black associations at my university and in Montreal, generally speaking. Fun fact about Montreal, we have the second most universities per capita in the world after Boston. So there's a lot of different universities, a lot of different student associations. So I was very embedded in that. Also, like I said earlier, led our student union board of directors, chaired our board of directors for the business school, sat on the board of directors, sat on faculty council. And in doing so, I had met a range of different student leaders throughout my time in student politics, if you want to call it that, or student government. And so by the time I was graduating, I had already identified a group of student leaders, people that I had worked with in the past, people that I knew were highly motivated, that would deliver when asked to. And so I kind of approached some of these student leaders that I'd worked with in the past and was like, hey, listen, this is kind of a problem that I've identified, and I think we could do a substantial amount of good in addressing this. And mind you, this was pre-George Floyd, right? This is we start these conversations pre-George Floyd, pre-Black Lives Matter. So, and I'd already been doing a lot of organizing within the Black community at the time. And so we start organizing this, and then George Floyd happens, all of the protests start happening in North America, especially, but globally as well. And that, I think that helped us a lot in terms of getting a lot of support. But a lot of that work I'd done in looking for jobs and meeting people, that really helped, because those are the people, like when we did our first conference. So we do conferences, 2 major conferences every single year before the recruitment cycle in the fall for students and in the winter, all right? So that students can come and meet employers before applications are due, talk about internships, meet other professionals, so on and so forth. And so that first conference especially was me really reaching out to people that I had recruited with personally, because I already had a job at the time. So either it's colleagues, either it's people at other firms, and trying to create an environment with the support of the school, with the support of my career advisor, and create this space where students can come and meet other Black professionals, can engage with recruiters from different companies. And I would say since 2020, where we had our first event, we've had over 1,000 people attend our events, over 50 companies in both the private and public sector, multiple panels talking to students about different career paths and opportunities, and numerous students that have gotten internships and full-time opportunities as a result of that project, right? And to take an even further step back, when we talk about leadership, for me, at inception, it was very important to build something that ran itself, So I knew day one that I don't want to be, not that I don't want to be a part of this, but this has to exist without me, And I think that's very, very important in terms of the way that we think about sustainability within leadership. You know what I mean? And thinking about building sustainable institutions, right? So from day one, it was about how do we groom a team that can lead this and execute without me, and then how do we groom that team to groom the next team to execute and execute and execute, right? So now we're like 4 teams in. Right. And we've had different iterations and different leaders, and we're still growing, and each team brings its own flavor and its own perspectives, and they're incredible leaders. Everyone this is something that is beyond me. This is something that has taken a shape of its own because of just the incredible people that have committed to it and the space that we've created for identifying new leaders. And then once these leaders are identified, allowing these leaders to come in and trusting them to shape the space as best as they can and to take it to the next level, right? So since we started off with just conferences, and then now we do workshops throughout the year on how to develop a strong LinkedIn profile, how to network prior to our sessions, in collaboration with the career management services. And not only do we engage with students on campus, but we've had students from other universities in Montreal attend our events, other universities across Quebec and across Canada as well, because especially early on, we started off virtually, seeing as it was in COVID. So we had this kind of diversity, right? So I urge anyone to, go check us out on LinkedIn. You can see our page, you can see recaps from our events. And I have a lot of faith, at this stage, I'm hands off. Like I was very focused on how do we build new teams, identify new teams, how those new teams build the next ones. But we're at a stage of maturity where like I'm hands off, and the leadership team this year has done a phenomenal job. And I trust that they will continue to find new leaders, and, and whenever I'm needed, I'm happy to jump in. But when I think about leadership, more broadly speaking, and sustainability of leadership, particularly as it pertains to African communities on the continent and globally, one of our biggest, like I said, when we talk about digital transformation, the transformation is not about the digital, actually. Once again, it's focused on the people and the processes, right? So I think when I think about leadership within African communities, it's really focused on people. Right? How do we train leaders that have a vision for the future? How do we train leaders that are rooted in their values, that care about the people that they serve, that want to see the best for their communities, that are ready to sacrifice themselves for their communities, that are public servants? Like the leadership is incredibly challenging. It's a huge sacrifice if done properly. If done properly, it's a huge sacrifice, even for myself in many ways. Like when I'm doing all these student leadership roles, that's time I'm not spending in class. That's time I'm not spending studying. That's less time I can spend with my friends or just relaxing. So I've made personal sacrifices that I'm okay with and I'm happy with, because the fruits of that is the betterment of our community, and the betterment of our community is to my benefit as well. It's to our collective benefit, So when I think about leadership on the continent, even globally, when we talk about global shapers, it's really about people that are fully dedicated to serving their communities and to envisioning a better world and manifesting that, and then now to talk about the Project Umoja thing, right? Just super briefly, what we're trying to do with that podcast and with that project is to interview a range of different subject matter experts, African subject matter experts that are focused on Africa and its diaspora, that are, people leading in politics and business and culture and entrepreneur, people that are going to be able to speak to the complexities of our development challenges, and that can bring forth solutions to, all of the challenges that we see across the continent, and also manifest the future that we believe we deserve and that we believe that we can have. So, yeah.
I just wanted to, invert now the question, which was based on all these roles and experiences that you had, how did that make you a better leader? Not looking at it now from a leader's perspective, but as a
Mhm.
person going through all these things, what made you a better leader today, both personally and professionally, for your development?
I think one of the big things for me is observing different leadership styles, being a good follower. That's a big thing, that's a huge thing, and I think just being able to be on a team player, Like people oftentimes look at leadership as like, oh, the president, the CEO, the VP, the big titles, But be a star in your role. It's a team. Everything takes a team effort. We're watching the AFCON right now, And it's like, yeah, sure, the striker scores the goal, but you need a defender to keep the other goals out. You need a goalkeeper to play the role. You need the midfield to make the right passes, so on and so forth. So everything is a team sport. So I think a big thing has been, observing other leaders, the successes and mistakes of other leaders, being a follower myself, trial and error in terms of working with teams and working with different people. And it's an ongoing process. I continue to make mistakes. I will continue to make mistakes. I'm proud of my mistakes. I don't shy away from them. And I will allow my mistakes to kind of push me to grow and to be better. So that's what I would say in terms of and what I've learned from these experiences.
You touched also briefly on the podcast Umoja, the Project Umoja, and I know you are involved in some speaking engagements as well, other speaking
Mhm.
engagements. So, what could be some tips you have for effective communication, or for the youth that have doubt in bringing up issues that they need to bring up, or speaking up when they need to speak up, or being confident in taking a decision or moving forward in regards to their careers?
So I'll break my answer into two pieces: one about effective communication, and two about effective decision making. So I would say when it comes to communication, the biggest part is just listening. I think we become substantially better communicators when we just listen and we understand the environment and the dynamics around us. You know what I mean? If you factor in other people's feelings, if you factor in where people are coming from, other people's challenges, and you'll be able to have them understand you a lot better. You know, speaking to someone that just went through a traumatic event, if you're trying to get them to understand something, would be very different from speaking to someone that, just had a very positive experience and is, you'd be more tactful. You might be softer with a person that just went through something more challenging, more attentive, more delicate. So those are things to factor in. Don't be afraid to speak your mind, but make sure to do so respectfully. Make sure to remain professional, remain on the subject at hand. Try and remove people's try and keep things away from being personal as much as possible, and take your time. If you're going through a challenge, take your time to reflect on what you want to say before just saying it. Timing is important. Now, when it comes to effective decision making, when it comes to career development, I would say then, just talk to people, listening again. Make time. I remember the summer before I started working the summer before I got my internship at Deloitte, I would have 3 or 4 coffee chats a week. You know what I mean? And I just reach out to people on LinkedIn. Some people will get back to me, some people won't. It didn't matter. You know what I mean? Rejection is part of it. It's okay. Embrace it. You know what I mean? So reach out to all kinds of people from from consulting firms, banks, all kinds of things, NGOs, coffee chats. I read up on their profiles beforehand. I'll tell them that hey, I really just want to, get to know you. You have an incredible background and profile. And in doing so, I think the coffee chat is such a powerful tool because it allows you to have an interview without the pressure of a formal interview environment, right? Because everything is ultimately an interview. So, but, you have the opportunity to flatter your interviewer by learning more about them, being engaged and deeply curious about their own experience. And then in doing so, they would have everyone is the main character in their story, right? So when you have someone speak to you about their own experiences, they feel like the main character, and they're ready to share, and that makes them feel valued and seen. And so when you then ask, or you then share hey, I'm going through this, or I'm looking for an internship or a job opportunity. If you have any ideas, please let me know. This is my background. Then they would be they would receive you a lot more positively because already you've demonstrated that you're someone that's attentive, you're someone that's curious, you're someone that's engaged, and most of the time, and then you're someone that's nice to be around. And that's what most people care about when it comes to working. Ultimately, it's yes, you need to be competent, but if you're competent, but no one wants to work with you, you're incompetent. You know what I mean? You'd rather have someone that doesn't know how to do the thing, but everyone wants to work with. They'll learn how to do the thing, whatever it might be. So that would be my advice to people there. Talking to people would really, take you a long way in your own career, show you new paths, and even give you support when applying to things and seeking out opportunities.
Interesting. What is one piece of advice or mantra that you live by that's been recurrent throughout your life?
That's interesting.
It's a very specific question.
I know. And you're dating me too. I'm very young. We're very young still. You know what I mean? We're still
based on your background, I mean, people wouldn't say you're so young, but yeah. I mean, it's all about perception and perspective.
Yeah, for sure. But I would say, something that's been resonating with me a lot recently, and that's very important, is slowly is the fastest way. Slowly is the fastest way. I ran my first marathon a few months ago.
Congrats.
Thank you. Thank you very much. But I learned a lot about myself in that process. And one of the big things that rang out, like I ran it. I'd been training for months, for like, I wasn't worried about it, but I had a little injury before. And so during the competition, I got cramps and it was just a tough experience, way worse than what I expected, worse than any of my training sessions. You know what I mean? But it allowed me to spend a lot of time reflecting as I was, waddling along with the pain and trying to get done with like 42 kilometers. And in going through that pain, I realized I was like, hey, like if I had started off this race a little bit slower, I would probably, have gone faster actually. You know what I mean? But I started really, really, really fast. I got tired early on. You know what I mean? Fast compared to the injury I'd endured. If I was just, healthy, that was a normal pace. But I didn't factor in like how much that injury affected me. And not doing so, not going slowly at the beginning actually slowed me down in the long term. You know what I mean? So slowly is the fastest way. Like there are people that started off slower than me and that finished before I did. But I started off fast, but like it's important to take your time to do things. You know what I mean? Let things take the time that they take. And you'll always be rewarded for that in the long term. Enjoy the process is what I would say. Patience is a virtue. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the conversation. We touched on many things, which I think will be very interesting to our audiences on a personal level, but also on a more global scale. And thank you, Maurice.
Sure.
I really think you have a very interesting background, more so not only in the places that you work in now or that you've done, but the countries you've lived and the background that you have. It's very interesting, and I think a lot of the audience are going to be in awe a little bit of how much you've done at the age that you have. If you want to share the age that you have, I don't know if people, but you
Yeah.
look like a young guy, so I'm pretty sure they can see
Ah.
that you're youthful. So
Yeah. No. So I'm yeah. Like we're like age. I'm like 25.
yeah.
So yeah, trying to figure things out. There's a lot of things that I don't know still, and like even where I'm gonna be in the next year, 2 years, 3 years. Hey, if I'm in Maputo, I'll definitely give you a shout. Like we'll definitely have to figure something out. But yeah, like still on a journey, still trying to figure things out for myself. But
China's gonna
excited.
be a whole new chapter.
Yeah, so starting a whole new chapter in the next few months, moving to Beijing. That's going to be very exciting. God willing, everything goes well, and that's ends up being a very positive experience. I'm very excited for that. And then seeing what comes of it. If I'm going to end up immediately back in North America and Europe and Africa, I'm looking forward to moving back full time to the continent. That's a big goal of mine in the medium to long term. So. Let's see how things go. And like Shaquille, I have to say, I really appreciate you. This is a very unique. There's a lot of themes that we could explore also about our own experiences growing up and the context in which we met and all of that. But I think for me, there's a lot of pieces of me in different places. Mozambique
Exactly.
being one of them. My Portuguese is not as good as it used to be, if it was ever good to begin with. But I will say though that depending on who's listening to this, you can be listening to very different versions of me. You can be listening to Maurice, that was in Montreal in Canada, le francophone de Montréal, le québécois. You can be listening to Cameroonian Maurice, the English-speaking Cameroonian Maurice, to le francophone, le Camerounais qui vient de Yaoundé, de Douala, tout ça. You could be speaking to the Maurice that you experienced in Madagascar and Kenya and Zambia. So there's a lot of different layers to my experiences and to the way in which I engage with people. But this is a very unique one. And this is, I really appreciate having had this opportunity to speak with you. And hopefully we'll have many more of these conversations as the years progress and as we have long lives, God willing. So,
God willing.
yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Maurice. Thank you.